I am now going to overview the chapter History of Graphic Communication. In the industry's documentary Harvest of Wisdom, it is said that the story of civilization is the story of communication. Between 15,000 and 35,000 years ago, there were cave paintings produced in Lascaux, France. When those paintings were discovered not too long ago, it was determined that those cave paintings was the first form of graphic communication. Picture writing, pictures that communicated ideas and thoughts. However, it's believed that civilization was born when people started to write. Some of the first writings took place in the Middle East, the cradle of civilization, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and so on. And this was in the form of cuneiform and related languages. After Egypt developed as a form of modern civilization for its time, Rome took over. Rome took the place of the world's major empire. And the Romans knew that knowledge was power and that knowledge came from books. And the Romans believed that it was important to exercise the mind and the body. And such activities took place through writing and through reading. Now, Rome was the world's most powerful nation for about 800 years. It took 2 centuries for Rome to fall, and that was in 410 AD, with the invasion of the barbarians and the Dark Ages begun. The Dark Ages involved many hundreds of years where little happened, except the rise to power of the medieval church. Now, this lasted for about 1,000 years, during which people were ignorant. They could not read. There were no books. The books that were discovered prior to the Dark Ages were all destroyed by the barbarians, except in England. In England, the churches and the monasteries had books. They saved the books, and they were rewritten through the monks. So the churches became powerful, and they helped preserve knowledge. People who wanted to learn came to the monasteries. Small schools evolved in the churches, which later became some of the great universities. And the Renaissance begun. The Renaissance is known as the birth or the rebirth of learning. Johann Gutenberg is sometimes called the inventor of artificial writing. We call it printing. Now, Gutenberg did not invent the printing press, nor did he invent movable type. Movable type was previously invented by the Chinese thousands of years ago, perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. What Gutenberg did, he invented a way of reproducing movable type. He was a metallurgist. He knew the difference between hard and soft metals. And he developed the mold and the matrix and learned how to take a piece of movable type and duplicate it many times over. Gutenberg worked with a 23-letter alphabet, and he invented the mold. The mold was the key technology associated with what Gutenberg did. But like a lot of inventors, Gutenberg died blind and penniless. His invention did not secure many resources for him, but he's considered one of the most influential people who ever lived because of his invention of So Gutenberg is considered one of the most influential people of all times because of his invention that spawned the birth of printing. The printer became a very prestigious person. Not many people knew how to do printing, and the printer became feared. The printer became someone to be feared. The printer became dangerous and had to be controlled because of being able to print revolutionary ideas. Many printers were executed for printing things that were critical of those in power or represented unpopular opinions. Most violations had to do with statements regarding religion. The press actually resulted in religious freedom. Without the printer, it is said, the Reformation might not have happened. We know that to destroy a civilization, all you need to do is destroy its printed records. We see that in modern times when dictators take over and try to destroy a civilization. One of the things that they try to do is to destroy records of the past. John Pablos was one of the first North American printers in the 1500s, and he was in Mexico. Mexico became a printing center back then. It wasn't until 1606, 75 years later, that a printer came to Jamestown in the United States. And the first known printer was in 1638 in Philadelphia. The first known printer in America came to Philadelphia in 1638, and that was in Jamestown. I'm backing up here. 75 years later, a printer came to Jamestown, and the first known printer in 1638 arrived in Philadelphia. Ideas of most revolutions were expressed through the printing press. But before printing, before newspapers, there were town criers. News books developed. News sheets became the first newspapers. American newspaper printers broke new ground in freedom of the press. Freedom of the press became a reality leading to the American Revolution. People started reading more. The telephone developed. The typewriter developed, and photography followed. In 1890, the New York World printed the first publication in color, the first newspaper in color. In 1887, Ottmar Mergenthaler invented the linotype machine, and the linotype machine is considered one of the greatest inventions of all time. Then came radio and television, and computer technology developed. Desktop publishing has increased the need for printing and made it more exciting. Gutenberg's invention made knowledge the property of all people, but all people who can read. Then came satellite transmission. Pioneer Satellite uses picture writing to bring messages to the universe. Okay, I'm going to back up here. Gutenberg's invention made the invention Gutenberg's invention made knowledge the property of all people, but all people who can read, and not everyone was able to read. This country backing up. Gutenberg's invention made knowledge the property of all people, but all people who can read. And not everyone was able to read. Even today, not everyone is able to read. There's a vast population of illiterate people who've never learned to read beyond the 3rd and 4th grade level. However, when printing became popular, when printing became a means of knowledge and information, people began to realize the importance of knowing how to read. And printing did make an impact on the level of illiteracy that occurred back then. Backing up. And printing did have an impact on reducing illiteracy, although the problem still exists not only in the United States, but in many countries of the world. Then came satellite transmission. And one of the first satellites that was launched to communicate to civilizations that may exist elsewhere was launched with a picture in it. A picture of an American I'm backing up here. Let's forget what I was saying about satellite transmission for now. The latter part of the 20th century brought printing and graphic communication into the electronic era. Lasers were developed. Microwave relays for transmitting information that was going to be used in printing. And satellite transmission of black and white and color developed. And then microchips and microprocessors developed to a point where the size and cost of electronic technology used to produce and distribute print became less expensive and smaller than ever before. Electronic technology created a synergy for the graphic communication industry. Color electronic prepress scanners developed, image setters developed, front-end and integrated systems developed, as well as digital printing presses. And all of this is now interconnected. And all of this is now interconnected in single systems. So computers and desktop publishing has become everybody's business. Everybody is doing desktop publishing, regardless of the field you're in, regardless of whether you're a student or a professional or someone working from the home. Integrated circuits, transistors, microprocessors, backing up. Integrated circuits, transistors, microprocessors, and silicon chips made this all possible. Since the mid-1980s, almost all technology developed for the printing and graphic communication industry is driven either fully or partially by a microprocessor. The miniaturization of and cost reductions in microprocessor-driven technology has given nearly any person access to printing technology. The author of print can now be the producer of print. So, if we look at the timeline related to the history of graphic communication, we can say that movable type in China was developed about 2,000 years before Gutenberg did his work. And in 105 AD, Tsai Lun in China developed paper. What's interesting about what Tsai Lun did is the technology, which was very crude, What's interesting about what Saloon did was the emulsification of pulp in water and then beaten into thin strips is a technology or a process not too different than the processes used today in multi-million-dollar, very huge paper-making machines. Paper is made, basically, by emulsificating the large majority of the world's paper today is made simply by the emulsification of pulp in water, but processed through very long and very expensive very large and very expensive technology. About 20 centuries elapsed between the invention of paper in China and its manufacture primarily from wood fiber today. So starting with Gutenberg and the development of the process of duplicating movable type. So beginning with Gutenberg and his process of duplicating movable type, which took place in 1456 or thereabout, it was 560 years ago that this took place. In 1886, Mergenthaler developed the linotype machine. That was 530 years after Gutenberg did his work. But in 1954, 68 years later, the Harris Corporation developed the first phototypesetting machine. And 14 years after that, satellite transmission was used by Dow Jones in distributing and producing newspapers. And 14 years later, in 1954, the Harris Corporation produced the first Okay, let me start over with this particular piece. Starting with Gutenberg in 1456, when he did his work, or thereabout, that was about 560 years ago, over 560 years ago, technological transitions in graphic communication came increasingly more rapidly. Now I'm going to start over on this. Beginning with Gutenberg in 1456, that was over 560 years ago, technological transitions in graphic communication occurred more and more rapidly. In 1886, 530 years here. In 1886, 530 years after Gutenberg did his work, Mergenthaler developed the linotype machine. And 68 years later, the Harris Corporation developed the first phototypesetting machine. 14 years after that, Dow Jones used satellite transmission for producing images and transmitting images that would be sent worldwide to produce newspapers simultaneous in different sites. 6 years later, computer graphics on CRTs developed within various engineering industries. Computer graphics has played a large role in the development of graphic communication images and technology. It was only 3 years after that that color monitors were developed for the transmission of graphic images, and this was developed by many different companies. 2 years later, the Cytex Corporation in Israel developed the first integrated system that integrated all pre-press departments into one operation: typesetting, copy preparation, image assembly, color separations, and so on. In 1980, 1 year later, the Gannett Corporation showed us how to distribute color through satellite transmission, and that developed that. And that was the technology that led to the birth of the newspaper USA Today. Since 1980, the development of technology in graphic communication further accelerated. Between 1980 and 1985, we saw the deregulation of telecommunication that made telecommunication systems available to any private company that wanted to use it. Between 1985 and 1990, we saw the development and the proliferation of low-cost desktop publishing. And 1990 to 1995 were the years of multimedia. That's when we saw the first integration of different media types that led to the metaphor and between 1990 and 1995, we saw the birth and growth of multimedia technology. And from 1995 to 2000, we saw the development of on-demand printing, variable data printing, digital color printing, and so on. And what of the early part of the 21st century? Well, we saw the diminishing of pre-press, where pre-press, press, and post-press became integrated. We saw the development of web-to-print and print-to-web technology, and e-commerce became a standard way of doing business. We saw the development and growth of internet publishing, virtual reality, wetware, which means being able to build microprocessors from organic components of the human body. And we saw the invention of 3D printing. Integration of pre-press, press, and finishing processes today are common in one system. And now we saw the birth and growth of cloud computing. This concludes an overview of the chapter History of Printing. I hope by having heard the overview and by having read the chapter, your understanding of the important role of graphic communication in the production and distribution of knowledge has taken on a new meaning for you.